I got the chance to speak to you a few years ago where we really went in depth with
Mhm.
Lavender Mountains and Song for Hope, and so I will link to that.
Okay.
So but in case you wonder why I'm not covering those particular tunes, it's because like we spent a
Sure.
lot of time on that
Yes,
before.
we did. Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
but what and it's interesting hearing those now in this compilation in this full album as it
Mm.
takes you on this journey.
Yes.
And you described I want to get this right. You described this album as you were going for a retro modern feel. I think I know what you mean by that, but I'm wondering if you can elaborate.
I mean, I don't even know if it really if I mean that for the entirety of the record or just some of the tunes, but some of the retro sounds in Pastel Dreams, for example, or Eventide, Take You On, some of the vintage synths and stuff. I've always loved that vibe, and I wanted to kind of put my own spin on it. And I think to some people, they probably hear older influences in my playing to begin with, so I don't think that's something that's foreign with me when it comes to people's perception of my playing. So,
Mhm.
to me, it's always kind of an amalgamation of, where we came from and how can we put like a newer spin on it, because it is 2026 and no matter what we do, it's gonna be something that came out now. So I guess that's the
Right.
modern part of it.
And I thought it was interesting, and I don't know if maybe this is just the whole subjective nature of your term, but even the artwork for the album, I would describe as retro futurism.
Yeah, yeah.
As a guy who grew up like reading these books by Isaac Asimov and Ray Bradbury,
Mhm.
it had kind of the same style as those books, and I'm wondering how much input you had into all right the visual aspect of that album.
I mean, that was definitely not an accident, I didn't exactly control what the cover art was, but I definitely gave the artist Fluco a vibe and a direction, and he's heard the music and he knows what the whole thing is about. So it was intentional trying to kind of capture that visually and make all the visuals, whether it's on the album or the music videos or my signature guitar, kind of be a running theme with the music and how I not only hear it in my head, but what I see and what colors it kind of corresponds to in my head and how I
Mhm.
internalize it.
Okay, okay. Yeah, no, I mean, and other people have noted the similarities color-wise
Mhm.
with, your signature guitar and the album, and so I'm just always interested when, because it's always artistic expression, but I'm always interested when the artist has kind of a vision that they're trying to share
Yes,
visually, and
yes.
obviously, from what I've read, you had very definite opinions about what your guitar should look like, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
okay.
And, these were things that we've been working on for years and trying to kind of tweak, to get to as close as we can to how I see it. So I think it was a worthwhile journey,
Mhm.
and I'm really proud of how it all became a running theme because it doesn't always feel easy. I mean, you can kinda see in your head what you want it to do, but whether or not you can make it actually convey that way seems like getting from point A to point B is not always clear.
Yeah, and I'm wondering because you're preparing for solo shows that you're gonna be doing in Europe to promote the album. I'm wondering also as you do prep work for that, are you now hearing more of a cohesiveness to all these songs that evolved over the last few years now that they're all being played as part of one show?
Yeah, totally. I mean, one thing that really helps with that is when you start mixing and especially mastering the record and you put it in a sequence and you evaluate masters and you really hear it in order and you kind of hear it as a running theme, as a cohesive piece for the first time. And, you kind of shuffling that around and making the last tweaks on it, it's really helped me see it as one thing, one entity. But yeah, putting it into the show, especially with older tunes and working on the sequence for that and everything, and getting to the point where I'm not just playing it to record it, but I'm playing it to perform it, and everything is, yeah, it definitely breathes new life into the thing. And then you realize like, oh wow, yeah, I'm one album older now. Here we are
Right.
again. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of it kind of always hits you after the fact when you're like, oh wait, I did another one of these. That's crazy.
Right.
So yeah, here we are.
Right. And there are some really interesting aspects to this album and these songs. There were some with these songs that had intros that I swear you would never hear on your typical guitar-oriented
Sure.
album, and I thought, "Wow, this is really interesting." Like,
Hmm.
you mentioned Pastel Dreams, to me, that had a very kind of it started off like a Pet Shop Boys song, kinda,
Hmm.
again, with the retro synths and
Yeah,
everything, and
exactly.
then, what was the one? Every Player Wins
Mm,
starts off with this rapid fire Latin conga,
mhm.
and I'm wondering how those intros came about, and was that also kind of part of your thinking for the song, or did that come about later when you brought in, percussionists and such?
No, that's kind of part of the writing, you know. I really do my best to write away from the instrument as much as I can. To me, I like to hear things in my head and jot it down as notes and voice memos and stuff like that. And the melodies I know will most likely be played by a guitar. But the arrangement around it and what the whole thing ends up being is kind of whatever I hear in my head. And I admittedly like a lot of synth stuff. I like sneaking it in there and everything. So if that ends up being the intro, so be it. And then same with every player wins. You know, it's all kind of service the tune, service the music. And to me, like it's a heavy tune, but it always feels like kind of a Middle Eastern tune to me. You know, so I'm kind of thinking like, well, that would have that type of percussion being very prominent in that kind of music. And I actually had the guitar line, the main guitar line from that tune as an intro for the longest time, and then had the percussion come in, and I just actually didn't like it. I was just like, you know what? I feel like the percussion kind of rolls out the red carpet a little bit better on this one, and I prefer that authentically to the style of music that it feels like it comes from to me. So I just decide to go with whatever I think services the music better. And if it has some self-indulgent things for me to play in it, so be it, you know what I mean? But we
Right.
deal with the live part later. I first wanna, like, kinda shape the music how I feel it should be, and then the rest is later.
Yeah, yeah, I get that, and no, I like that idea of kind of rolling out the red carpet for, "All right, this is going to set the
Mhm.
scene,"
Yes.
and also because it's so unexpected, like, you move over to the next track and you're like, "Oh, I
Where that yeah. And I
did not
never
expect
think of
this."
it like that, you know what I mean? Like, to me, it's just like, it's another thing that I heard, it's another genre that I like, or it's another direction that I like dabbling with, and I never think like, "Oh, wow, you know, when you put it together on a record, this is not gonna be what people expected to hear next based on what came before," but it's just that to me is like a happy accident in the end of it, you know what I mean? It's never in the foreground of my mind, but that's cool if it happens, you know?
Mhm. And then getting back to the line, "I like to write away from the instrument,"
Mhm.
'cause I guess, I would think most people would just assume you have a guitar in your hands, like, 24 hours a day and just always noodling and
Not
stuff
at
like that,
all, yeah.
and so, is it more that you sing these parts and then, that's kinda how you get the ideas out of your head?
Yeah, yeah, I sing the parts into the voice memos, and then if I hear any other arrangement ideas around it, then I'll take notes on it, I'll either even, like, sing the drum groove or say, like, there should be these hits here, or synth should do this here, or whatever, just so that I remember everything, that I heard in the full picture, and then whenever it's time to start fleshing it out, I get to my Logic workstation, and I use all the fake instruments to just build the full arrangement, and it continues to be based on what I'm hearing. So everything is just with the ear leading first, and I've always believed that sometimes when you have a guitar in your hand, because most people can overplay, that can derail you, that can turn
Mm.
a really good, succinct cohesive idea into something that now has too many notes or is now recognizable because it looked cool or felt good or had cool shapes to work with or whatever. And I don't really want that to happen. I wanted to I wanted to stay true to what I heard and have it develop from there. So it always goes back to the ear. Um, and that's why I like working that way with the demos because there's no way for me. I have no keyboard chops. I don't even use a controller, usually a MIDI controller when I demo stuff. So there's absolutely no chance for me to bastardize it. There's no chance for me to overplay it or make it more than it was supposed to be. It's just going back and asking, is this what I heard? Is this, shaping exactly? Is this like really jotting down how it sounds to me?
Yeah, and I mean, it also brings to mind the fact that I would describe a lot of your playing as very lyrical. It's
Oh,
it's
thank you.
it's you know, I know there aren't lyrics, but you sometimes
Yeah,
you swear there are
sure.
lyrics that
Yeah.
you're
I mean, that's
in
the
your mind?
idea, like it's songs without words, I always think. So,
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting this whole idea of, okay, how I'm going to translate what's in my mind into music, because in reading the materials that were sent along with this album, um, it's I think it's the first press release I've ever had that mentions synesthesia, uh,
oh, okay.
in it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and, just once again, the idea that within your mind, something from one sense triggers things in another sense. Sounds
Yeah.
trigger, sights and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and it's a fascinating idea. And have you ever heard of there was a book, written called Born on a Blue Day? I don't know if you
Mhm.
ever heard of that.
I don't think so.
It was written, and it's about this guy who was, for lack of a better term, an autistic savant,
Okay.
and he saw numbers as colors and shapes,
Mm.
and as a result, what he was able to do, I mean, like, he could memorize the number pi out for thousands and
Oh,
thousands of
wow.
letters, you know, and so I'm wondering, 'cause you mentioned that and, said you have, quote, "a touch of it." I'm
Mhm.
wondering, how does this manifest within you?
For me, it's always been I mean, listen, this is a self-diagnosed thing, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
There's no
Yeah.
proof that I really have anything like that, like, or what the extent of it is or whatever, but to me, I've always kind of I feel like I've seen either, like, certain key areas in as certain colors or certain tones, certain keyboard tones as certain colors or certain reverbs as certain colors, and it's just kind of, like, corresponds to a color palette, so to speak.
Mhm.
Um, and I guess the more fleshed out the idea is, the more it seems like a certain hue.
And I'm wondering, first off, have you tried to use that to explain to other musicians what you're looking for when you're I mean, I know you work things out, with Pro Tools and
I
all that kind
haven't
of
I
thing, but
haven't really done that, but I feel like when I give other musicians demos to play over, they hopefully already have the direction kind of conveyed in them,
Mhm.
and it's not to say that every musician is gonna go and play verbatim what I had in the demo, but it's usually fleshed out enough, usually, for them to know, like, okay, this is kind of the range or the vibe that I need to be within. And then if that doesn't really fit, then we can talk about how to make that closer. But that usually happens more in musical terms and technical things, like whether it's a tone thing or whether it's a part or whatever it is. Um, but yeah, it's very seldom nowadays that it's that open to interpretation when someone comes in to record stuff on top of it.
Hmm. And I'm wondering, and I know this could be way off base, but does thinking about it in terms of these different color palettes help with transitions within a song? Just because you can imagine if you're painting and you're trying to do, transition from this color to this color, you don't just stop and
No,
move.
that's an interesting point. I don't think I considered that. Like, I think I end up with, at least with my last few albums, I've ended up with different genres on one record that don't always seem like they go together, and I have to find some sort of running theme that makes sense or a way to connect them. I didn't really consider that as a way to go. That's an interesting experiment maybe for next time because that could be helpful, you know. But I feel like there's more to the pacing, you know, like the tempos of the different songs and just like I think there's a general feeling in an album of like the ebbs and flows of what should come next that I kind of try to base it off of.
Okay. Yeah, and also I'm thinking about within a song because another track that really stood out for me on this album is "Tip the Cap,"
Mm,
which is very different, but in particular, it has these really cool subtle transitions that to
mhm,
me, you don't really realize it until after it's happened,
mm,
and to me, sonically, a lot of the song seems to swing from on the one side, it's this, um it reminds me kind of the piano section of Layla, it's this
okay,
kind of a lush, emotional,
mhm,
thing, and then it kinda swings into this contemplative jazz kinda thing, and then but it swings back and it swings.
right,
But it's smooth. It's not
yeah,
like you're being jerked around, and
right,
I'm
yeah.
wondering, it made me think of that with the color palette, but also I'm wondering just also, what's the key to doing that so smoothly?
You know, I don't really know. I think it's just again, it's trying to understand what similarities genres have between them, you know, because at the end of the day, there's always something in common. And that's something that I really had to think about with my last album, Spectrum, which really morphed from one genre to the next. And the idea there was like, you know, however different two genres seem, there's usually something that the two of them share, you know, whether it's like certain grooves or certain chord progressions, even if it's
Mhm.
not the instrumentation, you know, there's always something that kind of unites two things when you don't think it might. Um, and I try to go between the things that are more similar, and I think that gives it a smoother transition, you know, rather than trying to connect them by the things that they don't have in common. You know, so finding the commonalities and trying to smooth it out from there, I think helps, you know, because jazz and classical or you know like nylon string playing is I don't feel like those two are too far from each other, you know what I mean, in vibe, or like you're not going from a super loud heavy thing to like low dynamics solo nylon string guitar, and even that, you know, like there's great ways to marry those that people have done that don't have to seem jarring. But if you take the similarities, I think it's a lot easier to like weave together.
Yeah, and it's I don't know, and it was also just, with the idea that songs are kind of a window on a person's soul, it's kinda interesting to have a song like "Tip the Cat" where, it's like, "Oh, just I've heard so much of, this great kinda shredding work that you do," and then just to make this sudden turn into this, kind of acoustic
Mhm,
area, it's like, "Oh, wow, there's a whole other facet to this
mhm.
musician going on here."
Yeah, that's the idea, that's the idea, to give kind of just like a little window.
Mhm. And, and it's funny because, like, the way you are in conversations, you're very kind of mellow, calm, you know, easygoing, and yet a lot of your playing on this album and another work, there's this dark grittiness to
Yeah,
it. What was the one? Oh, Losing Grip, it has
yeah.
this great gritty rockabilly thing, and, you know, I'm wondering that grittiness, where do you pull from personally to get that out into the music?
I mean, honestly, I don't maybe it's not obvious in conversations, you know, but I feel like I feel a lot of internal intensity and anxiety and just like, "Ugh," you know, a lot of umph. And I feel like it's easier for me to to get that out on a guitar. Like, that to me is my natural, uh, default on a guitar,
Oh,
you know? Just, like, to go harder is easier for me than to back off. So it's interesting that you say that because I think, I definitely have my, like, anxious moments where I can't relax. Like, relaxing is definitely doesn't ever feel like my default. That's something that I have to work a lot harder on. So that translates well to just pouring more out of it on a guitar is a lot easier for me than restraining myself.
okay. Wow. Alright, because what was it, like a week or 2 ago, you had this post where it was
Mhm.
like, a musician off the road, and it was just
Oh,
you
yeah.
just being neurotic.
Exactly. Like, you wait for that moment, you're just like, "Ah, I have so much to do all the time, and there's so many balls in the air and so much juggling and everything, and, like, how do I get this through?" And you're just like, you think you're gonna enjoy that earned day off whenever you get to it, and then you get to it, and I'm like, "I don't know what to do with myself." It's, yeah, no, I struggle with that for sure.
Wow, okay, so
Yeah,
then it
totally.
wasn't just a joke, it was like
No,
you
it was
you
not a joke. It was not a joke. I mean, listen, like there's times where you really need it and everything and all that. But I think just the fact that it's also abrupt, like when a tour starts, it ramps up somewhat gradually, but when it stops really abruptly and you hit a wall. And
mm,
so sometimes it's hard to process like that sudden stop of like I just got used to this routine. I was just getting good at this, I don't know how to process that like one day that's it. You were told this is it. This is the end of it. And
yeah,
sometimes dealing with that can be tricky.
interesting, yeah, um, and I mean, because even if you know, alright, the tour starts here, it ends here, it's still an
Yeah, you definitely
abrupt.
know, but it's just and for me a lot it has to do a lot with like how I feel I performed. Sometimes I'll have a really bad habit of just analyzing how things went and just trying to like go over it or whatever. And it kind of dawned on me sometimes that it's that you're looking for something to process because you don't know how to put an abrupt stop to it. Like again, you were told
Mhm,
this is it, but sometimes your brain doesn't really know where to put that until you've kind of had a chance to mull over it.
interesting, yeah, no, I never thought about that, um, it also reminds me of, I've had a number of conversations with Ben Caesar, who's the drummer for Brad Paisley,
Oh,
and
wow.
he talked about, like, the times where they arrange a set list where it's something that's going 100 miles an hour, and then the next song is a ballad,
Yeah.
and trying to
Yeah.
slow, because 'cause you're mentally still going 100
Yeah.
miles an
Yeah.
hour and, like, "Oh my god,"
Yeah,
and
calming down the nervous system like that in spurts and going back and forth is not necessarily the most natural thing in the world. Maybe
Right,
ramping up is, but maybe but again, just kinda like trying to stop it and then just telling your body like, "Okay, now take it really chill, don't rush." Like that's hard.
right. And then it also reminds me, 'cause, I've seen the footage, and we talked about this last time, but the work you do with Cirque du Soleil's Michael Jackson show, where you actually leave the stage at points and
Yeah.
then come
That's a
back.
totally different yeah, that's a totally different animal than being on stage and playing through a show. And
Yeah.
even with Danny Elfman, there's like its own version of it because there's times where the orchestra will play film music that we don't play, and we stand there and watch the orchestra, and that's a
Mm.
lot of time to think, and that's in a way that can be even stranger because you're still on stage. You're
Yeah.
still being seen. I mean, there's a lot going on that stage, so I don't think, no one's really paying attention to you and you're not lit or anything, but at least at Cirque, like, you're off stage. You're not, like, you go do your thing and then you get good at kind of going back and forth like that. But yeah, every show's got its own set of challenges when it comes to that, and it definitely keeps it interesting.
Yeah. No, I never thought of how that can really kinda screw with your
It
mind
can,
as
it totally can, but you know what? So can staying on stage and playing through it, because then you're off to the races, that's a different animal too, you know? Once the show goes, like, that's it, you know? Like, that can feel a little uncontrolled as well.
yeah, yeah. And then, just kinda staying with this, so your 3 regular gigs, for lack of a better term, are, with Danny Elfman, with Cirque du Soleil, and also with the band Dethklok, and I was interested in what ways did those bands, gigs, etcetera, influence or inspire what's on this album?
I mean, I think they always do. I think it always gets in there in ways that you don't necessarily always even are aware of.
Mm,
Um, I think I think with Dethklok, like, it influenced some of the like, you know, I used the same guitar with the low tuning, the C standard tuning, on this record,
mm,
just because that's where I was at the time. And then when I went and I recorded it, and I was like, okay, I have to do all the rhythm parts with this guitar because they get kind of low and everything. But then everything with the leads ended up being in like strange keys for me that I don't normally play in, you know. But that's how the song was written, so I just kind of adapted to that, you know. And so those are things that just happen, and it doesn't mean that the music is as heavy as Dethklok is, but you have some low chuggy rhythm parts and some of those tunes that are very keyboard heavy or synth heavy. And again, it doesn't sound like Dethklok, but the djenty riffs are still in there somehow, and they're still in that register, and it just brings it to a different place sonically when you put a bunch of dark synths on it and melodic lines.
mhm. Yeah, and I don't know, just the I also love the idea that again, music industry people, especially businesses and labels, like to put people in a box. Okay,
Sure.
this is you, and it never really works out, in reality.
Right.
And I think it's kind of fascinating because no one, if you were grading on paper,
Mhm.
okay, you wouldn't put one person in all of those 3 jobs, because it seems so they're very diverse
Yeah,
in how they present the music
sure.
the I mean, they're all very emotional and very intense, but just,
Right.
you know, um, and so I think just the fact that you're in all of those and
Mhm.
have consistently been in all of those really speaks to, it's like, no, the average, human, the average musician is way more complex
Mhm.
can be contained in a single genre.
Thank you.
Um,
Yeah, I mean, I like to think so, you know, at least when given the chance.
right,
So,
right.
yeah.
And I mean, and then I mean, what would be your advice for people that, do want to, stretch and try new things? I mean, how does one create a career where you have those different opportunities?
I mean, I don't know, I didn't design it that way, you know. I think just being able to show that you are versatile and have the ability to morph into different things, I think is what kind of gets people's eyes open towards that, you know? So I think maybe putting out records that have different styles on them is maybe one way to get people's attention on, oh, this isn't just one thing, you know, or taking different gigs when they come, and again, like, showing through actually doing it that you have the ability to it. I think again, it's just getting it on people's radars.
Yeah, yeah. And then, you know, what was, I mean, what was the most challenging song on Eventide to create?
As far as writing or as far as just
Getting a finished, polished song.
um, that's a good question. You know, they each have different challenges, whether it's how to mix it or uh, getting the right people on it. But I think a lot of times when I'm dealing with genres that are newer to me or that I feel less familiar with, there's always a question in my head about whether I'm really getting it to where I want it to go, and not necessarily how it should sound, but whether it's, like, authentic to me. So, no, maybe every player wins.
Mhm. Okay.
That had a lotta nuance in a lot of stuff, both the playing and the instrumentation and just getting the right parts to come through.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Because yeah, it's again, it's like you get swept up in the wave of each song, and it just kinda carries you along, but it's only especially as I'm trying to think of questions and go back over and over, it's like, wow, there's really a lot of stuff in here.
Yeah.
And, I can't imagine trying to arrange all of those layers, so that they are
Well,
so cohesive.
that's
It's
why my albums take a while, like, I try to give it the thoughtfulness that it requires and not just, like, finish something because I have a quick deadline and have to get a new album out there, I want it to be thought out and conveyed the way that it should be. I don't, I don't like putting things out before I feel like they got to where they could go.